Earth Defense Force 5 is finally out on PC. I bought it a few days after release and have been playing it since. Now, I assume that if you're watching this, you know what EDF is and what it's all about. If not, then hi, I'll get to you later in this video. So, either use the timestamp or just keep watching and be confused, I guess. For now though, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the games. I'm going to start with a quick spoiler-free overview before getting into the game more in depth. First, my EDF cred, or lack thereof. I've been interested in the series since it was on the PS2, though I really didn't get into the games until 4.1 on PC. The games I've played enough to have an opinion on are EDF 2 Portable on the Vita, EDF Insect Armageddon on PC, EDF 4.1 on PC, and of course EDF 5. I've played all of those games to the end credits. I've never done Inferno difficulty endgame in any of them. I do my first playthrough as a ranger, and for co-op I tend to play as the air raider and drag my team down as I fumble around with vehicles and make poor use of airstrikes. I say all of this so that you know that I haven't played enough of the Wing Diver or the Fencer to have an opinion on them. It also means that if you're the kind of person that only plays for the end game, then this review is about as useful to you as a chocolate fireguard. So, if you own EDF 4.1 and didn't feel the need to play EDF 5 as soon as it was available, should you buy it? Honestly, I say wait for a sale. The quality of life changes are really nice, and the game is an upgrade from 4.1 in many ways, but it's basically more EDF. To give a quick summary of the upgrades, the game has a new loot system where duplicate weapons can sometimes provide upgrades. There are some graphical improvements like Gore and Gibbs, and most classes have an aura that makes picking up crates easier, as well as various mobility improvements. The Ranger can do a Call of Duty style sprint now, which is handy for picking up crates and reducing the downtime between fights. It's very nice, but you can live without it. They can also call in a limited selection of vehicles as well, which is great if you want to play with that stuff but don't want to be bogged down with the Air Raider's weaker weapons. Speaking of Air Raider, he has had significant upgrades. Calling in bombing runs now pulls the camera back to an almost RTS view so you can place them accurately. Airstrikes show a template of where they'll hit, making them easier to learn and allowing friendlies to avoid them. Gadgets can reload in your pocket now, so no holding an empty turret case waiting for it to recharge. And AC-130 airstrikes are used with a beacon gun with a short cooldown, making them a good alternative to the limpet gun. Some other airstrikes work on long cooldowns instead of points. If you main Air Raider, then it might be worth getting the game because the upgrades are substantial. The new enemies are interesting and the new loot system is very nice, though again might not be worth the upgrade on its own unless that was a deal breaker for you. The plot is basically a reboot, being a retelling of the classic EDF story. Things have been moved around, so things introduced earlier now introduced later and vice versa. If you're new to the series and want to jump in and see what it's all about, EDF 5 is a good one. Arguably the best one so far, and it's a good point to jump in. Just know that the first few missions in this one are tutorials, and they're kind of dull. I should also mention that these games are good in single player, but they can become crazy in co-op. But the biggest knock against EDF 5 is that EDF 4.1 is cheap and can likely be picked up even cheaper on sale. I think it could be argued that EDF 4 is more iconic, but I'll get to that at the end of the video. With that overview out of the way, let's get into the review proper, starting by going all the way back to the beginning. What is EDF and how did it start? The series started back on the PS2 as part of a series of budget games called the Simple 2000 series. While many Simple 2000 games were typical budget crap like Mahjong and crappy versions of popular games, there were some interesting games that came out of it, like Demolition Girl, where a giant woman in a bikini is terrorizing a city and you have to distract her with cake, and Zombie Zone, where you play as bikini-wearing cowboy samurai fighting zombies. If I had to guess, I'd say that the lower budgets and lower cover price meant that developers were incentivized to make more off-the-wall games. Having less money on the line would mean there would be less to lose if the game didn't sell. Also, being unable to compete on graphics and polish meant that games had to stand out in other ways. So having a game where you drove down the motorway for 4 hours collecting briefcases kind of makes sense in a weird sort of way. That game spawned a bunch of sequels, by the way. Anyway, back on the topic. EDF has come a long way since those humble beginnings, and even spawned various spin-off games. Like most games, EDF 5 is best played with as little knowledge going in as possible. Unlike most games, the things that can be spoiled are not so much the plot, but what enemy types you'll face or what crazy over-the-top weapons you'll get. We can debate on whether or not those kind of things are spoilers, especially since they are often shown in trailers or on the back of the box, in the store page, and so on. Even so, consider this a spoiler warning. I won't be revealing everything in the game or going in depth about most of it, but this is your last chance to turn around if you don't want anything revealed at all. Though I'd question why you're watching a long form review of a game weeks after launch if you're that sensitive to spoilers, but hey, what do I know? So, what is EDF about? As you've no doubt guessed from the footage, EDF 5 is an action game inspired by 50s sci-fi movies. Giant insects have invaded Earth and it's up to you to stop them. You do this by choosing one of 4 character classes and playing through 100 plus missions, getting more health and better gear as you go. You can change class at any time, and each has their own playstyle and gear to earn. There's the Ranger. He's your standard shooting game guy, and the best class for beginners since they're the most straightforward. He can bring 2 weapons from a wide selection of typical FPS weapons like shotguns, machine guns and rocket launchers. New to this version is the ability to sprint and armor mods. Most armor mods are simple utility upgrades like the ability to run faster or to have a larger crate pickup radius, but some allow you to call in vehicles. As said, this allows you to play with vehicles without going air raider. The Wing Diver, aka the Wing Slut, are agile jetpack troops with fancy lasers and plasma weapons. Their weapons and abilities pull from a recharging bar, leaving the player vulnerable if they get themselves in trouble when they don't have any charge left. They also make for spectacular light shows in multiplayer. The Air Raider is all about calling in airstrikes. He does have some direct fire weapons, but he'll usually be relying on vehicles such as tanks, helicopters and mechs, gadgets like turrets and healing stations, and the aforementioned airstrikes, bombing runs, strafing runs, cruise missiles, artillery and laser satellites. As you might have guessed, they are capable of ridiculous amounts of widespread destruction in the right hands. As I said in the quick overview, the Air Raider has had a ton of love since the last game and is both easier to use and more fun. And finally there's the Fencer, a guy with a bulky suit of power armor that's hard to use effectively, but comes equipped with riot shields, giant hammers that send out shockwaves, oversized punchy fists, miniguns, and what is basically artillery guns for sniping. I could never get the hang of this guy in the previous game. EDF 5 removed the boost cancelling shield trick, and instead you can install armor mods that increase how much you can boost, along with other effects like recoil reduction. I did once see a Fencer player almost able to fly by chaining boosts. The missions are individually fairly short, usually taking around 10 minutes to complete. Some are shorter, some are longer, but there's a lot of them. The game does reuse the same maps repeatedly, but it doesn't feel like you're repeating content or that the game is padded with filler. There's a lot of variety in enemy types and how the missions are designed. I think the large size of the maps also helps, since each mission doesn't necessarily use the full map. EDF games have always had a few dud missions, usually the underground levels where you walk down a maze of brown tunnels. EDF 5, however, starts off with 3 slow, linear, boring tutorial missions where you follow NPCs around oversized tunnels in an army base. Not a great way to introduce the game. That said, I'm mixed on if this kind of tutorial is a good idea. To me, EDF is a simple enough game that this kind of thing isn't needed, but I've also known people fail to understand fairly simple games in the past. As you kill enemies, they drop crates. These crates can be the health crates, which give you, well, health, armor crates, which permanently increase your health by a tiny amount, and weapon crates, which unlock new gear for you to use. New to this game is a revised loot system. EDF has a lot of different weapons, ranging from overpowered to silly. New to this game is the ability for weapons to level up. So even if you get a bunch of duplicates, chances are you'll level up some existing weapons. This means that getting a huge haul of weapons only to get nothing out of it is rare in this game. This ability to level up weapons also means that some weapons I wasn't too keen on could become really powerful once they were leveled up. That said, I think some weapons start off too weak. The starting weapons were a bit too weak and inaccurate for my taste, but once again this is fixed a few missions in once you've got the first few loot drops. It still leaves a bad first impression. There were also times where I'd get a new, higher level gun that was worse across the board than my lower level but upgraded weapon. Another change is that you gain weapons and armor for classes other than the one you're playing, albeit at a slower rate. This helps to power up classes you rarely play, meaning that you can switch out if you're bored without having to start over. But what makes EDF special is the sense of passion. I've brought this up in my reviews of the other games, but there's this hard to define sense that the people making the game had fun making it, or at least wanted the player to have a good time. Things you wouldn't see in AAA games because they wouldn't directly translate into an increase of sales. Joke weapons aren't really effective, but they are included because they're funny, or the option to have your characters dance and sing, which will cause nearby NPCs to join in. Another interesting detail is that it avoids all the usual AAA nonsense. You simply buy the game and you get the game, as in the whole thing. That's it. There's no season pass, no live service roadmap, no bullshot FMV trailer or loot box microtransactions. The closest it gets to this kind of thing is the DLC in the Steam store, but what's currently there is gaudy, low-effort skins for items you find in the game anyway. And they are never advertised or even mentioned in the game in any way as far as I could tell. There is also post-launch DLC content packs available, with one being available at the time of writing and another on the way. I can't really comment on those as I have not played them. What I will say though is that the game feels complete as it is, with about 15 to 20 hours of content for a single campaign playthrough, and with me having put 52 hours into the base game and still having fun, there's no shortage of content here. I also want to mention another thing that I like about EDF, and that's the sense of skill, the level of destruction, and the hijinks that can occur in co-op. First, the skill. Many games with large monsters and robots can make you feel like a toy. This game manages to keep the giant things feeling giant. This is important because not only are the enemies big, but so too are the explosions you cause. It's not unusual for players to level a building with plasma bombs or flatten entire blocks with bombing runs. Then you add co-op into the mix. By the way, I should mention that the game does include split-screen co-op. I've not tried it, but I know some people care about that. Anyway, co-op increases the carnage to a crazy degree, be it multiple air raiders bombing a city into rubble or wing divers lighting up the night sky with lasers and plasma. It could be spectacular. The game is also designed for players to assist each other. Air raiders putting homing beacons onto important enemies for fence and missile barrages, or covering tanks with turrets and hell stations. These harebrained schemes are rarely effective, but they are still fun nonetheless.
Monsters have entered the combat area.
Monsters! Ground troops, protect Varga! We'll take care of the monsters!
There are a bunch of other new features and changes too. There's laser sights, which cause your crosshair to change colour when pointed at something in range. There's armour penetration on weapons, new gore effects and damage decals that make it easier to tell when an enemy is damaged or dead. Drones use a new design similar to their EDF2 designs, complete with coloured lights to tell you if they're dead, alive or patrolling. All these sound minor, and they are, but they also add up to make for a better game overall. One of the big new additions is aliens, frogmen that run around, dodging shots and hiding behind buildings. They can even lose track of you and will react with surprise if you sneak up on them. This kind of stuff has been around since Half-Life, but it's good to see it done well in this game. There's also a binary domain-esque system where you can shoot off limbs to make them fall down or drop their weapon. The game is far from perfect, however. The most consistent issue is the camera and enemy ragdolls. It's not unusual to have your view blocked by a giant ant corpse. Sometimes they can even block your shots or movement, which can be mildly annoying, but it'll rarely cost you your life. What's worse is that friendly NPCs are dumb as shovels. You want them around to help you out, even if they aren't terribly effective. They still do something, but they have this annoying habit of deciding that any player character aiming an oversized rocket launcher needs a hug, or that an air raider calling in a laser-guided cruise missile can do their laser eye surgery at the same time. A couple of minor problems only I seem to care about are that certain missions NPCs will advise hiding inside buildings, but you can't go inside of buildings. The closest is hiding inside of a multi-storey car park or the stairwells of tenement blocks, but I'd hardly call those inside. Like I said, I seem to be the only guy that cares about that, but I thought I'd mention it. The other thing is a cool detail where you see the magazine swap on assault rifles, but then again that stops happening once the weapon is upgraded. It's not game breaking or important, it's just strange. One flaw is something I can't really blame on the game itself, and that's the human element. When you start the game, you can play it on easy, normal or hard. Each difficulty offers slightly better drops than the one before it. It is possible to beat the game the first time on hard, but the game recommends playing on normal first so that you have decent weapons and armor to tackle the tougher enemies. As you might imagine, when I play co-op, people always choose hard to get the better loot and end up getting frustrated as everybody dies in just a few hits. Since armor drops don't scale with difficulty and permanently increase your maximum health, and it's not unusual to have somewhere in the region of 1000 health, for a ranger anyway, by the end of your first campaign run, but you start off with something like 200 health. So essentially, if you jump straight to hard, you have a team of novice players with a quarter of the health they're meant to have on a difficulty intended for skilled players, and then people wonder why their teammates are useless and dropping like flies. For context, I have more than 200 hours logged across the series as a whole, and even I don't feel as though jumping straight to hard is the best way to level up. I think the goal should be to have fun, and if that means playing on normal and having a great time trying out all the cool toys, then do that. Not everything has to be some optimal power leveling farming strat. Speaking of which, many loot games have a problem where players find the path of least resistance and grind for loot, replaying the same level or boring task over and over, and then stop playing because the game has gotten boring. I've not had that happen in EDF 5 yet, but it did happen in EDF 4.1. And it makes little sense in EDF because loot for a given mission is tied to a specific item level range. So once you've done a couple of runs, you've likely got everything you can get from that mission on that difficulty. Playing the game naturally and doing missions in order is fun and will get you enough loot and armor to progress anyway. I don't see the need to grind. Maybe if you use helicopters and sniper rifles a lot in single player, you might end up not collecting as many crates, but if you care that much about loot, you'll likely hoover up crates occasionally anyway. What I'm basically saying is that you'd have to try to not make progress naturally. Again, that's a problem with the people playing and not the game itself. As said, the biggest knock against EDF 5 is that EDF 4.1 exists and at a cheaper price. EDF 5 is better in many ways, but it might be worth starting at EDF 4.1. The best comparison I can make is to say that EDF 4.1 is Halo 3 and EDF 5 is Halo Reach. Or maybe it's GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, or Resident Evil 3 to Resident Evil 2. Okay, that last one's a stretch, but the point I'm trying to make was that Halo Reach was arguably a better game than Halo 3 in many ways, but Halo 3 is the more iconic of the two. Perfect Dark was a fantastic game, but GoldenEye is the classic. I'm guessing that many people can draw the facility multiplayer map from GoldenEye from memory, whereas you can't really say the same about Area 51 or the pipes in Perfect Dark. EDF 4.1, for all of its flaws, has more memorable moments. Characters talking about giant insects is way better than calling them all monsters. Me and my friends still say, "Fire the Requiem gun," when we're using an oversized weapon in any game. That's not to say that EDF 5 has none of these moments. It does. Like early on when they consider an army of giant insects and UFOs to be a terrorist attack or an invasion by a foreign power. And the storyline of having the heroes that start off as a security guard, an electrician, or an entertainer is great. But I don't know, Fire the Hooligan cannon doesn't have the same ring to it as dropping the grind buster. Maybe that's because I played EDF 4.1 first, I don't know. Either way, you can't go wrong whichever one you go for. The quality of life changes and added depth are nice, but not essential. If you're new to the series, start wherever you like. If you've played EDF 4 and weren't sure if you should upgrade, I hope this video helped you make that decision. Thanks for watching. Bye.